Ever wonder how your brain just knows which way is which? Well, today we're diving into the secrets of your own internal compass, and we're going to do it by looking at some incredible new research that shows us how our brains build that sense of direction from the ground up.
You know that feeling, right? You pop out of a subway station in a new neighborhood, and for just a second, you are completely, totally lost. It's more than just confusion. You can literally feel your brain scrambling, trying to figure out which way is up. That's the feeling we're going to unpack today.
And believe it or not, the secret to our own internal GPS might just come from this little guy, the Egyptian fruit bat. We're about to look at an amazing experiment that took these bats to a totally remote island, all to see how a brain builds a map from absolute scratch.
For a long, long time, almost everything we knew about navigation came from studying animals in tiny little lab boxes. But what happens when you finally take the research out of the lab and into the messy real world? Well, as you're about to see, that's where things get really interesting.
And this is a huge deal. I mean, for the very first time, scientists have actually watched a mammal's brain build a mental map in real time, in a totally wild environment. See, navigating a small, familiar box is one thing, but mapping an entire island you've never been to before, that is a whole different ballgame.
So, how does this built-in GPS in our heads actually work? Let's break it down. Scientists have found a few key players. You can kind of think of it like the hardware and software that make up any navigation system. First up, you've got what are called place cells. These were discovered way back in the 70s. They're basically neurons in your hippocampus, that's your brain's memory hub, that act like little pins on a map. A specific group of them fires when you're at your front door, and a totally different group fires when you're sitting at your desk. They're essentially shouting, "You are here."
Okay, so if place cells are the pins, then grid cells are the map itself. They create this incredible geometric grid across your mental map, which lets your brain measure distance and figure out how different places relate to each other. This was such a massive discovery, by the way, it actually led to a Nobel Prize.
But, knowing where you are is only half the puzzle. You also need to know which way you're facing. And that's the job of head direction cells. Fun fact, they were found completely by accident. These neurons are like the needle on a compass. One bunch fires when you face north, another when you face east, and so on. But this brought up a huge question. How does that compass actually work in the big, complicated real world?
And this led to a big debate, really. There were two main theories. The first was the global compass theory. It suggests that north is always north, no matter where you are, a single, stable direction. The other idea was the mosaic theory. This one suggested your sense of direction kind of resets everywhere you go, so north in your living room could be a completely different direction from north in the park.
To figure out which one was right, scientists had a problem. A big one. The problem was the lab itself. They realized the only way to get a real answer was to break out of the controlled setting and actually get out into the wild.
And when you stop and think about it, that makes perfect sense, right? In a tiny little box, a lab rat can see all the walls at once. That's not how navigation works for us. Out in the world, we have to remember landmarks we can't even see and stitch together a map in our minds. The lab was just too easy.
So as a first step to scale things up, a researcher named Nachum Ulanovsky and his team built this absolutely massive 200-meter-long flight tunnel for bats. And the results were immediate. The bats' brain cells started acting differently than they did in the small boxes. They knew they were onto something, but even this giant tunnel wasn't big enough to solve that global versus mosaic question.
And this is where the story gets really cool, because the big breakthrough didn't happen in the lab. It happened while Ulanovsky was scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef. He realized the answer wasn't a bigger tunnel, it was to find a completely natural, wild laboratory.
And they found the perfect place, Latham Island, a tiny, remote spit of land off the coast of Tanzania. It was uninhabited, mostly barren, and crucially, it was just big enough that the bats couldn't see from one side to the other. It was the perfect stage to watch a brain build a brand new map from scratch.
So, the stage was set for what has to be one of the most ambitious neuroscience experiments ever even attempted, taking the entire lab out into the wild.
I mean, they literally moved to this island. They set up a whole field camp. Then, they fitted 6 of those Egyptian fruit bats with these tiny wireless recorders that could track their brain activity in real time while they flew completely free. The whole process was just painstaking. Every single night, they'd release the bats to go explore this new world, tracking their exact flight paths with GPS while simultaneously recording their neural data. Then, every morning, they had to recapture the bats, download all that precious data, and get ready for the next night. All in all, they collected data from over 300 separate flights.
So, after all that incredible work, what did they find? Was the brain's compass that stable global system, or was it the fragmented, shifting mosaic?
The answer was clear, decisive even. It was the global compass. The bat's head direction cells locked onto a single, consistent sense of direction and held onto it no matter where they were on the island. A brain cell that fired for north always fired for north. Just like that, a 50-year-old debate in neuroscience was finally put to rest.
Okay, so a huge win for neuroscience. But what does this actually mean for us? Well, this experiment didn't just solve the debate. It showed us incredible new details about how our own brains build and maintain their sense of direction. So here's what they figured out. First, this internal compass wasn't instant. It actually took the bats about 5 or 6 nights for it to stabilize and lock in. Second, their brains successfully stitched all the different views from all over the island into one single cohesive map. And third, and this is really cool, the compass wasn't anchored to the stars or the Earth's magnetic field. It was anchored to physical landmarks on the island itself, things like the coastline and even the researchers' own tents.
And this research perfectly explains that physical jolt we talked about at the beginning. Another neuroscientist, James Canerium, described a time he was walking in Manhattan and realized he was going the wrong way. He said, "I can literally feel it inside," as his mental map just violently snapped back into place. That's the feeling of your global compass realigning.
And honestly, this is just scratching the surface. The data they got from this island is already showing that these navigation cells in the brain are way more complex than we ever dreamed. Out in the wild, they don't just track direction. They also keep track of things like flight speed, information that was totally invisible in the simple setting of a lab.
Which leaves us with this one final, really big question. This experiment proved that to truly understand an organ that evolved to navigate the complex, messy, real world, you have to study it in the real world. This could be the beginning of a whole new chapter for neuroscience, one that embraces the chaos of real life instead of trying to eliminate it. So you have to wonder, what else are we going to discover when we take science into the wild?